I'm Chris Stafford, and this is Art, the podcast about women from the world of visual arts.
If you don't feel it, I'll make you feel it. I'll show you what I mean. If you don't feel it, I'll make you feel it. I'll bring you to your knees. If you follow me.
My guest this week is Gretchen Warthen, an American cinematographer whose work has taken her from Hollywood sound stages to shooting from the back of a camel in India, an elephant in Thailand, the bow of a boat off Venezuela, hovering over Alaska glaciers and the deserts of the Sahara in a helicopter. Gretchen was born in Idaho, the only child of parents Catherine Warthen, a retired horticulturalist, and Brian Warthen, who, after a lifetime of struggle, found his true success in graphic arts. As a child, Gretchen was a tough girl in school with a rebellious nature. After high school, she headed to Boise State University, where she gained a bachelor's in communications, before moving to Washington State, where she went back to school at the Evergreen State College for a bachelor's in liberal arts. It was at Boise State that she began taking an interest in filmmaking and undertook projects that showed her natural talent for the art, which led her to pursue a career in the industry. By then, Gretchen had a plan to be a camera operator, and she steered her course, starting in wardrobe, through set design and props, until she was on the set where she wanted to be. Her youthful defiance and determination paid off, and led her to success across genres. Gretchen has worked as the director of photography for the Emmy-nominated Netflix documentary series Circus of Books, the Epic International OWN documentary series Operation Change, the Emmy Award-winning NBC series Starting Over, the Showtime documentary series The Real L Word, and the award-winning documentary feature East LA Interchange. She has also DP'd two award-winning narrative feature films, Sharon Gless's Hannah Free and Jamie and Jesse Are Not Together. Gretchen has also been a camera operator on popular Emmy award-winning primetime reality programming, including Project Runway, The Apprentice, and America's Next Top Model. Her narrative credits also include FX's Mayans MC, Fox's Call Me Cat, and Fox's Welcome to Flatch. Gretchen has also been a camera operator on the popular live comedy specials including Netflix's Dave Chappelle Age of Spin and Hannah Gadsby Douglas. When she's not working, Gretchen's passion is collecting Vespa scooters and driving fast cars. She lives in LA with her partner, documentary director and unscripted reality co-executive producer Natalie Watts. Gretchen, hi. Welcome to the podcast.
Well, hi, Chris. Thank you for having me.
Well, I know from the times we've spoken before that this actually could be, and we should actually maybe add a warning, this could be a very long podcast because you and I think could talk for hours.
Hilarious. Yeah, it could be. You're very easy to talk to. So yeah, it could be longer than normal.
I know you've been listening to the show too. You know what you let yourself in for.
Yeah, I kind of do know what I've let myself in for. When you first talked to me, I hadn't listened to any of the podcasts yet. I'm like, oh, okay, yeah. But like listening, all the stories and the journeys the women have been on in so many interesting or crazy or very intense experiences in their lives, and how they were so vulnerable and willing to share that. And then how it influenced their art or maybe didn't. So yeah, now I'm a little intimidated.
Well, you shouldn't be, because you're into storytelling anyway, right? So podcasting is a natural environment for you.
I suppose so. Like I guess I listen to people's stories and then just follow it with my lens. So it's as though I'm listening through my eyes. But I do let I talk quite often. I work in documentary and unscripted. I do scripted also, but my love is documentary. And it's all just about listening to what people have to say and choosing the right, focal length on the lens and how far I'm going to be away from them or how close to like tell their story. And it's interesting, like how close or far you are from someone, how it will influence how they're going to share their story. So it's important to kind of like pay attention to verbal cues or nonverbal cues with their body language. But because I'm behind the camera, I'm not the one that's talking. I'm not asking the interview questions, or I'm not the person that I'm following around. So I have the luxury of not having to have my internal dialogue, wondering what I'm going to say next or what question I'm going to say or where it might go. I can turn all that off and just listen to what they're doing. And it's a real gift to be able to just listen to people and let that drive my lens to follow them around.
You become the interloper, not the intruder.
Yeah. And it's nice, especially I work in reality from time to time. That's kind of where I got my start, was in reality, because they not a lot of women, but there were women there as camera operators. So that's where I got my entry. But I love competition reality, and specifically when it has to do with like people who are artists or creators, because I can't speak to them. So I'm in this room with 12 creators. Like at the beginning, there's usually about a dozen before they start being eliminated. And I'm just free to wander around the room. And it's like, oh, wow, what's that person making? And I get as close to what they're making as I want to and look at it. And then, once I feel like I have a good handle on it, I look somewhere else in the room and it's like, oh, what are they doing? So I get paid to wander around with my camera and silently watch people create. And it starts with them with a blank slate. And then at the end, it's, whatever it's going to be. I did Project Runway for years, and I was into clothes when I was younger, but I didn't know how they were made or the process. And it was just endlessly fascinating. I loved that show. And then I did Making the Cut with Tim Gunn and Heidi Klum. And that's more of an international version of Project Runway. And you've got all these talented designers from all over the world with all these different ways of viewing clothes and fabric and making. And I just love it. It never gets old. I just love it.
Because you began your career in wardrobe, didn't you? You moved around the closet and then to set design and made your way to hang around with the camera operators, and you knew where your pathway was intended. So like any industry, right? We really have to just get in there at the start and do anything, because if that's where you get the experience, which helps you when you eventually reach your goal, right?
Yeah. It was a very kind of circuitous route. I knew that camera was where, in like the story of how I got into where I picked up my first camera, it's like I knew in that few day experience, camera is where I was going to go. But getting there is hard, because it's the sexy job, the camera operator. Like everybody looks to them as like the one that runs the set sometimes, the director and the camera operator. And so it's very competitive to get into. And it was, when I started, it was all guys. And I knew I needed to be on set. So I was like, I need to come up with a plan. And so the first job I got was in wardrobe. And I was a shopper, and I would go, it was very low budget. So we would go to thrift stores, and it wasn't really a period piece, but the people all needed to look like they didn't have great clothes. So we went to thrift stores where, you can find clothes that look like people have worn them a few times. And so, dressed all these people, and we had guns on that set. And I talked to the AD about weapons handling and all that good stuff. And so even though I was doing wardrobe, I was looking at everybody on set and talking to the camera department and getting information from them and tips and tricks. And I made my intention known on any set that I was on, where I was going. And then that job led to me getting a prop job on X-Files as a prop assistant. And one of the things that helped me was talking to that weapons handler on that indie short, because once I was in the props department on X-Files, that's they handle all the weapons. And so I knew the proper etiquette and protocol and all the things for the guns on set and how meticulous you need to be in that position. And but every third day, I would ask the camera team if I could have lunch with them. So like twice a week, I would eat with the camera team and ask them questions. And I never asked them for a job per se. I felt like that would be kind of invasive. So I just, asked them a bunch of questions, and then I would watch what they did. And so it was like, okay, this is good. And then that job led to a job where I was again, an intern, but it was video assist. And it was this weird video assist thing. Basically, we had a TV with a VCR and I would record every take from a tap from the camera, and then producers or somebody would see it. I don't know. I actually have no idea where that went. But on that one, I was one step closer to the camera department. So I was interacting with them every day. And the second assistant was doing camera reports. So I asked her for a bunch of blank ones. And I would work with the script supervisor who was getting information from the second AC. And I started doing all these camera reports to match what I was seeing on the video tap, on all the things that I was recording. And so I started to learn about lenses and filters and proper coverage, because I never went to film school. Like I just, for me, it was the school of trial and error. I knew somehow in my heart, camera is what I wanted to do, but I didn't know all the technical things behind camera operating. I just knew that when I put a camera on my shoulder and I'm in the eyepiece, I'm lost. It's like I'm transported somewhere else. It's an even bigger experience for me than sitting in a movie theater and watching something on the big screen, which is amazing because you're lost in it. And then, but to have a feeling that's even more intense, being lost in an eyepiece that's only like 1 inch by 1 inch is kind of interesting. But so I learned a lot on that series, and then that got me a job as a second assistant, again for free. And I was working at Kinko's this whole time, and doing side hustles. I had a space at an antique mall, anything to pay the rent, but working on a lot of these indie projects for free. Because in Seattle in the winter, days are short, weather's terrible, nothing's shooting. So all the creatives that have worked during the year, they do their projects in the winter time. And since nobody's working, everybody crews everybody else's projects. So it's really kind of nice. And so I eventually worked my way up to focus puller. And then Real World came to town one day, and my loader was like, let's apply for jobs. And I had been shooting on documentaries this whole time. I should probably throw that in there. And it was all basically documentaries for free or for public access, or whoever would let me, operate a camera. I was doing that. So when Real World came to town, they asked for a reel. And I'm like, we're applying to be camera assistants and they want a reel? But they had seen on my resume that I had shot some documentaries. So when they interviewed me, it was to be an operator. And I was like, I couldn't possibly be an operator. I'm now in this narrative world a lot where if you're an assistant, you're an assistant. Nobody's going to offer you a camera. And there's an order to things about how you work up. But here I am being interviewed in this reality environment, and they're like, no. If you're a storyteller and you know how to operate a camera and you've done doc work, let's do it. And I'm like, no, I'll assist for you. But on day 2, they're like, hey, there's this story happening and we don't have anybody to cover it. Will you pick up a camera and go cover it? And we have somebody else that's going to do audio for you. And I'm like, great. So I go in and covered it and just kind of did my thing. And then this company had dailies where the next day somebody would work overnight with all the director notes and cut all the scenes that they thought were important. And this was an important enough scene. It made the dailies. So I was able to see the next day how I covered it and what was good and what was bad. And the directors in reality at the time were all documentary directors. So they could all do camera and audio. And they were amazing mentors to have. And so they went over the footage with me because everybody watched the dailies. So everybody then saw that I had shot a scene that made dailies and how I shot it. And I did a good job. So they continued to throw me into different scenes and guide me because we have microwave transmitters on our cameras even back then. And that was so long ago. So in the control room, they can see what you're shooting. And it's a dialogue driven format. So this is where it's tricky when you have directors. The dialogue of the people that I'm shooting, the cast, that's what's driving my lens. If I'm listening to a director, neither of us are listening to what the cast is saying, and then our footage falls apart and it's no longer dialogue driven. It's just me pointing a camera and creating a nice frame and hoping that hoping that I'm capturing something. So when you're a director in that reality environment, and quite often documentary, your job is to remain completely silent and watch what I'm shooting and listen to what I'm shooting, take notes, and then be the eyes in the back of my head. Like I have a shot, I'm keeping track of the dialogue, but I also have this running shot list that you need for every scene. You need a wide, you need some wide overs, you need some singles. A lot of time, you always have the audio, always. So people are very forgiving if you're not pointing at who's talking. Because some people are like, oh, you just point at who's talking. Isn't that what it's about? It's like, well, actually, the reactions are never heard. They're only seen. So quite often the reactions are more important than the dialogue. So I'm making all those choices as an operator. When I'm going to show the person talking, when I'm going to go for reactions. And I'm trying to keep track of all the shots that I have, my shot list, but the director who's also quietly watching what I'm shooting will start saying, and people tend to repeat things 3 times if they're really passionate about it. So on the second pass, it's like, okay, we have this, you got good coverage on it. Give me some wides, give me this, give me that, things that they've noticed I haven't been able to get. So they're kind of the eyes in the back of my head. And they may also be listening to microphones of people that are not in the location where I'm shooting, like if it's a house, maybe I'm in the living room and they're listening to people in another room talking about what's going on in the living room. And I'm not privy to that, but the director is. So they'll tell me, you've got what we need, go to the bedroom. So my audio mixer will turn up the audio of what's going on in the bedroom. Or if I have a good audio mixer, they will listen. And they will find something and tune up audio of people that are not in the room. And I look at them and trust my audio mixer because they're also looking for story or elements that are going to tell the story. And they'll silently point, and then we go to wherever room this like complementary conversation is happening that kind of flushes out the bigger story. So it's kind of this interesting, very quiet way of filmmaking and when I first started on Real World, we were not allowed to speak in front of the cast on walkie. Any question the director had, they would ask in a way that we could click on our walkie. 1 click for yes, 2 clicks for no. Like, did they really just say XYZ? And we could say yes or no, because sometimes the director would get confused about what we were shooting. And there were they call them stash boxes with fresh batteries and fresh tapes. It's back when we shot on beta throughout the house. And I would change my batteries and my tapes in the house. ACs were not allowed to come in. And the director would wait until where the stash box was clear and there were no cast near that space. And then an AC would sneak in and take the shot tapes and dead batteries and replace it with fresh. And then they would leave. So it was just me and my mixer. And we never spoke to each other. We were not allowed to speak in front of the cast. And we just had like little cues. Usually the mixer would do something with my audio to draw my attention somewhere or to have me look at them, and then they could point. And sometimes my mixer would just quietly say into the mic, go to so-and-so, because they're watching everything unfold and they're not distracted with camera choices. They're just listening. And once all the mics are good and their boom is where it needs to be, they start watching everybody. And you can tell when somebody's about to speak. Somebody may be silent for a whole half hour. So I just kind of stop thinking to look at them with my lens. But my audio mixer will know when people start to fidget, they're about to talk. And then they will give me a cue to pan to that person. And quite often, then that person starts talking. So it's just this interesting, very silent relationship that everybody has. And we try to be fly on the wall. But they're very well aware that I'm there because I'm moving to different angles and different shots. But how close or how far I am gets me kind of off their radar. And sometimes if somebody's having a very personal, revealing moment, I won't have the camera pointed at them. I'll come behind them. So I'm not even in their peripheral vision. So they are given the opportunity to kind of forget that I exist. And then they can become more vulnerable or connect more with the person that they're talking to. And that is another good example of there are reasons why you don't need to always be pointing at who's talking. Sometimes psychologically, people need a break and not to see the camera. And that gives them a moment to breathe and then to share even more. And there's this hilarious thing where it's like, it's an intense scene. And there are a few things that people want to say, but they haven't said. And it's like, you feel like they start repeating. So you're like, I'm going to get a wide shot. So I walk away to get the wide shot. And because I have created distance between myself and who I'm shooting, they are able to take a breath and then maybe say the thing we've been waiting for 2 hours of solid shooting for them to finally get around to, but they do it when I'm in a wide shot. And you know what? That is okay because we have the audio, which is key. It's all audio driven. And, I have a wide shot. And then of course we probably have a lot of reaction shots from earlier that we can put over it. But, in getting a wide shot, I have an earpiece that's connected to the camera. So I hear everything the cast says, even when they whisper. And when I'm on a wide shot and they say that line I've been waiting for, part of me is like, but the other part of me is like, great, we finally have it. And we have it because I gave them space. So I'll let them talk for maybe 30 more seconds. And then I'll slowly move back in so that they are able to. Because if I run back in, it kind of ruins everything because they're like, oh, what I've said was important. Here they are again. So I need to appear as though I'm just getting some wide shots and it's not really that big a deal to take the pressure off of them so that they can talk more about it. So it's very, as an operator, I need to be so keyed in to the shot list that I'm shooting, the dialogue that's driving me, the nonverbal of the people. Have I given them space, the proper amount of space? And also being completely quiet. If I breathe in deeply and out because I'm having back pain, they might perceive it as I'm bored and I'm taking in a deep breath. And so I have to be silent, keep my energy tight. I wear muted colors so that I don't so I can blend into the background. Quite often I'll try and match the environment, like in my color scheme when I get ready in the morning. So it's really all about being a fly on the wall and just listening. And I tell people, people that are just coming up, one of the camera operating is all about physics and muscle memory. And having a well-balanced camera and being comfortable so that you don't have internal dialogue about, this camera, it's too front heavy, or I'm getting shaky, or it's this or it's that. It's like you need a really well-balanced camera so you don't ever have to think about it. And then you need to be completely cued in to what's being said. But it took me about 7 years to create what I think is the most powerful tool for any operator, and that is muscle memory. To be able to zoom in and out, walk in and out, walk around people without tripping, develop a subconscious peripheral vision, peripheral awareness. So I don't even have to think about what's around me. I'm subconsciously navigating furniture and potholes and cars and trees and whatever obstacle there may be while I'm walking around, sometimes backpedaling, walking backwards with people for miles on end. So it's this muscle memory where I can, it took me 7 years to get to this point. But once the first time I did it, it was amazing. And that was, I was able to shoot a complete scene and not actually remember having a camera in my hands. It's as though I just witnessed it as somebody sitting in a room with people. And I knew at that point that I had achieved the muscle memory that I needed, the ability to disengage my internal dialogue and just completely key into what I'm doing and just let everything flow. It's like a flow state where you're just not aware of what's happening and you're completely in the moment. And it takes so long to get there, but once I got there, it was amazing.
As you know, this show is all about the formative years as well, of how we start on our journey. And I know for you, it all began back in Idaho. You were born in Idaho in the winter. So what do you remember of that? Because you've stayed on the west side of the country, gone from Idaho to the West Coast. What do you remember of your very formative years?
It's funny, like I was born in Idaho during a snowstorm. Like my dad's car he was driving broke down, but luckily my grandmother was behind us because we lived in a kind of a very small town, so we had to drive to another town where the hospital was. And so I wasn't born in the back of a car during a snowstorm, but that happened a lot where I grew up. People were just kind of born along the way and in their homes. But yeah, Idaho, it's funny. We moved to San Francisco before I really had many memories of Idaho. So my earliest memories are my parents being hippies in San Francisco, and just the interesting cast of characters that my dad was British and he traveled the world a lot. And then my grandmother married an American serviceman, and that's how they came to America. So along his journey, he had met a lot of different people and was very no judgment. When I was probably 3, 4, 5, there was a black transvestite that lived upstairs from us named Charles. And I loved Charles. Charles was great. And nobody really ever told me that there was any reason to not like Charles. So I didn't grow up with, excuse me, I didn't grow up with a lot of prejudice and preconceived notions on people because, San Francisco at that time was just this huge group of all sorts of creative artists and different people. And then when it was time for me to go to school, they decided to move to Idaho, which is where they both had family, and they felt like it would be good to raise me near family and aunts and uncles. And so we moved to a very small town of 200. And this is kind of where my memories of Idaho begin, because we were hippies from San Francisco, and my dad was Episcopalian and my mother's family were Lutheran. And we moved into a Mormon community. And so they had a city council meeting, and the topic of conversation was how to get us out of town. But we owned the house that we lived in and the land that the house was on. So in America, if you own your home and your land, nobody can do anything. And my dad was very rebellious. So he decided we were going to stay. So I kind of grew up with this kind of interesting life of, in first grade and kindergarten, the photos of me, my class photos, like I have like braids and I'm in this little outfit and I'm this cute little girl. But in grade school is where kind of the trouble for me started. Like I started getting beat up by the boys, and a lot of it had to do, like, my dad was also dealing drugs, but denying that, but we're hippies from San Francisco and we're this and we're that, and they don't really want us in the community. So I had to learn how to fight. And luckily there was this guy in town, Ricky Owens, who taught me how to fight. So by the time you see my 4th grade picture, my name is now George. I've cut off all my hair. I'm living my life as a boy. And my mom is totally okay with this because she's very like, she's one of the most non-judgmental people I've ever met. And her thing is, however you're comfortable, whatever makes you happy, I will support that. So she was fine with that. And I think she realized that this was kind of a mechanism for me to protect myself, was to create this kind of, different personality. And so like I fought everybody. And at one point I fought Ricky Owens and was stronger than him, and it shocked both of us. But that particular time in my life, that grade school era, is like the biggest memories for me, because it wasn't like, yeah, some of the girls were fighting with me, beating me up, but it was the boys. And I look back on that now and I see like a lot of male aggression to like gay boys and different things. And I'm like, wow, like I became so competitive with the boys, but I think it's because like I really had a problem with it. Somebody who was so macho, and to prove how manly they were, they would beat up a girl, or they would beat up a boy that they thought was gay. And I'm like, that's not manhood. That's ridiculous.
Did you get in trouble for the fighting in school?
Well, it's interesting. Usually the boys were a little, if I got the best of them, didn't really want everybody to know about it. But there were a few times where I did get in trouble. But they were strange. Like there was a time on the playground, we had a snowball fight. And I had the snowball, I was going to throw it at this guy. And he was like, do it, and I'm going to tell on you. And I was just like, So I just threw it to the ground right by my foot. And he was like, she threw that snowball at me. And I'm like, no, I didn't. You said you were going to tell on me. So it became this big thing. Told the teacher I threw the snowball at him. And then getting paddled and swatted at school was like completely acceptable where I went to school and at the time I went to school. But how they would do it with girls is you would turn your back to the class, bend over, grab your ankles, and then they would paddle you. And it was just like, I was so humiliated and so angry.
Which school was this?
Oh, it was the elementary school in the town I grew up in. It was like a 2-room schoolhouse because it was such a small town. And it was a different time. It was a different time, I'll tell you.
What was the name of the town?
The name of the town was Albion. And it has an interesting backstory in itself. Like in the 1800s, there was a abandoned college campus there by the time I got there. But in the 1800s, it was this big multi-building college campus with like a gymnasium with an indoor running track, a huge theater with a balcony, boys' dorm, girls' dorm, teachers' dorm, chemistry building, just huge. And it was just left abandoned. But the Oregon Trail used to come through there. The Pony Express came through there. It was like the hub of activity in the 1800s. And then it kind of slowly dwindled and people all moved away. And then when my family moved there to this quiet mountain town of 200 that they thought would be so serene and idyllic. And for me, it turned out to be like very kind of violent and anger causing. So it was a small town that had, I don't know, an interesting history to get where it was at. And a lot of, it was farmers and people who grew up and, living hard lives, and the winters there are hard. And, it was not a rich community. We were on the poor side, but we never really realized that we were poor. And I never really felt like we were poor because nobody really had money. But everybody, it was just these incidences with like at school. And I know a lot of that comes from the parents, but the parents were all pretty nice to me. Oh, yeah, getting in trouble. So that one time with Travis. And then sometimes people would call my mom and be like, your daughter, Gretchen, blah, blah, blah. My mom's answer was always, I'm sure they deserved it. And she would hang up on them. Like she's always been my supporter. She has always been in my corner.
You were the only child, right? So it's not like you had an older brother to stand up for you. But you didn't need it by the sounds of things. You were totally self-sufficient.
No.
I have this image of you in very rural, small town Idaho, riding your pony to school. Did you ride?
No, I did not. That's kind of interesting because it was a farm community, and my grandparents owned a farm kind of outside of town, and my uncle is still there. But my dad had absolutely no interest in farming, no interest in pretty much manual labor of any kind. I don't think I ever saw him in shorts. He was always like, he was not interested in farming. And I will say we did have a little Shetland pony for me for a small time, but it would always bug me off and rub me into the fence. And I never really took to that pony, but my grandfather had a horse called Daisy, and he would have me out and we'd ride Daisy around. And then Daisy had a foal that he called Flower. So it was Daisy and Flower. And so I'd ride Flower and he'd ride Daisy, and we'd, ride around the farm. And
I love that, Daisy and Flower. I could see you being a stunt artist as well, Gretchen. Fighting background, rough and tumble. You could jump on a pony. You could punch something.
Yeah.
If you needed to.
If I needed to.
Did that ever appeal?
No, it didn't. It's funny. When I went to junior high school and I was with new people that didn't really know who I was, at the end of that first year of junior high school, I was wearing dresses. My hair had grown out again. I was going by Gretchen. Like, there was no need for George anymore. And the last fight I ever had was in 6th grade. And I made a conscious choice at that time that I wasn't going to fight anymore, because it at that point it wasn't wasn't worth it. And when I hit 6th grade, then the fights were with girls, and I didn't want to fight girls. I didn't have any problems with the girls. I just thought it was silly when they would fight.
You wanted to play with the girls.
Yeah, or hang out with them. Or I still had like pardon me. I still had a lot of friends that were boys. I think that time in grade school where I like hung out with the boys and we were kind of in a little gang and we would fight and be tougher. That was like the people that kind of protected me. When I didn't have need for that anymore, I still had boys that were friends and girls also. I don't know. It's funny. I look back on even through high school, I have one friend from childhood that I keep in contact with, and that's it. And I think I just kind of had such a bad experience during that time in my life that I didn't connect with anybody because I was worried that they would turn on me, that they would hurt me, that somehow if I confided something in them, they would tell everybody. So I don't really have many friends from that time period, which is a little unfortunate.
When you were in school, what were your subjects of choice? What was distracting you? Did you have any favorite teachers that were supporting you as well and guiding you?
It's kind of interesting. And now that you've asked me this question, maybe this is why I did this. All through high school, I went to summer school. I was a good student. I got A's and B's, occasional C's, but I was always driven to go to summer school and just learn year round. And by the time it was my senior year in high school, I didn't technically need to go because I had all my credits. And, but I went anyway because I enjoyed learning, but it was also maybe a way for me to kind of not have to socialize that much. I could do it under the guise of going to class and learning things. But, one thing I really did appreciate was English, and I was a bit dyslexic as a child. So what I discovered my sophomore year of high school were books on tape. I mean, they're like in the cloud now, but at the time you would get the cassette tapes of whatever it was. And I had an English teacher. My English teachers were always the hardest one that you could possibly have. But I knew that that was a good thing because I was always raised that, knowing how to write and read will get you further in life than pretty much anything else.
Were you into sports?
I loved sports, but because I was not, I don't know if it's because I wasn't Mormon, but I was on the bench all the time. I was on the bench all the time. And when was it? My junior year, I changed schools, and then I was intimidated because I went to a much bigger school. Like in junior high, we were all in these tiny towns or strewn out around the mountains near Albion. And they were all like, I mean, there was a town that had like 50 people in it. It was a one-room schoolhouse. It was really small, but they would bus all these kids to one central high school or junior high and high school. But when I was the very beginning of my sophomore year, no, my junior year, I went to a bigger school and was so intimidated by everything that I quit sports and band because I don't know. I just felt like I wasn't good enough to be in this big school's band or their sports. And looking back, I wish I would have faced my fears and done more sports. And the sports that I was really good at were tennis because I could practice that by myself against a wall, and javelin, shot put, things where they were individual sports. The team sports, and I enjoyed them, but it was more the individual sports that I really liked.
So what point in high school then did you consider what you would do next? Where would you go with your career? And were you into film and TV? And were you that little girl that was, studying it through your childhood?
No, I wasn't. And, because we didn't have a lot of money, we might have a roll of film in the camera for 2 years and get it developed. It's just a big surprise about. So there's not a lot of photos from my childhood, but I started working when I was 12. That's when I got my first job. It was in a department store. I was in the back unpacking clothes, putting them on hangers, putting price tags on them. And then I had a series of jobs. In my junior year, I was the night cash clerk at this department store called Kmart, and I would reconcile all of the cash drawers for the day and do the deposit, because I also loved math. So I was good in accounting and bookkeeping and whatnot. So it was like a job with a lot of responsibility. And so when I was a senior in high school, I had a resume with all these jobs and people to call. So I got a job in a law firm. And my grandmother, her thing was, she was British and she was very aware of class systems and where you are in class. And she grew up lower class and always aspired to be higher class. And by coming to America and having a British accent, she was just thought of as high class just because of her accent. So she was living, on the West Side with the doctors and the lawyers and all this stuff. So her thing was you need to marry an attorney or be an attorney. She was very pro-law. So I was able to get a job my senior year in high school with the Idaho Attorney General's law office, which was a very prestigious law firm. And I started out as doing errands and filing papers and things. And I just kind of stayed with that law firm. As it split off and did other things, I would go with whatever attorneys were going to the better law firm. And decided I was going to be a paralegal because I didn't need a big legal education for that because I was paying for my own college and could not afford law school. And, it was nice. Like I'm in high school and I have a 401k and paid vacation and paid holiday and all this really great stuff. And I have a pretty good chance at a very nice future. So yeah, I was going to do law and I love debating and I like fighting. I think that came from my childhood of physical fighting, but I turned it into like being able to verbally spar with people and make a good point. And I did well in debate in high school, and I'm in the political science department and I have my friends. And then one day there's this Make My Vogue video contest that Madonna has on MTV. And we're all huge Madonna fans. It's like, oh, let's make this video. This will be great. So we went to Sears and bought a little video camera and came up with this video that we shot. And then we returned the camera because Sears had a really great return policy. We're college students, we don't have money. So we turned the camera back in and then found somebody in the communication department to edit it together for us. We didn't know what voguing was. Like we were doing drill team moves. It's hilarious to watch like what we did. But I loved that once just putting the camera on my shoulder and looking through that viewfinder, I was transfixed. I was transported. I was changed in some way. And so one of the girls that did the video with me, she's like, oh, let's take intro to video for audit. So we don't have to read anything or do papers or take tests. It won't affect our GPA. And I'm like, great, because we're juniors. We don't have a lot of time for fun. And the teacher I had, he was brand new. He had graduated with his PhD studying under George Cukor. And he was showing us all of these crazy films and experimental stuff and was just encouraging us to do whatever we wanted. So I was, just playing and having fun and doing what I wanted because it didn't matter because it wasn't for credit. I could do where my interest was taking me on that particular assignment. And I was, I'm in Idaho, very conservative. I'm totally in the closet. At that point, I have come out to no one.
This was Boise State University we're talking about now.
This is Boise State University.
Where you chose communications and you got your bachelor's there.
I did. I started in a lot of stupid things, but finished in communication. But at this point, I'm like kind of thinking pre-law, so I'm political science. And the last project I did in that class was a autobiographical documentary short about growing up gay. And when I kind of started putting the pieces together and how I felt, it was just like very revealing. And it was like very kind of stylized and a lot of stuff. And nobody knew about me at this point. So it's the last day. And because it's audit, I kind of went into this weird trance flow state and did this project in maybe 3 days, start to finish, starting shooting to finish editing. And there's a lot of complicated stuff. I still look back and I'm very surprised that I was able to do it, but it was a coming out piece. But I had this like sense of security because, it's not for credit. I don't have to show it, but something compelled me to make it. And then that final day in class when we're all showing our final projects, I slid it up the table. And to this point, I'd made comedies. And this piece is actually it's dark and kind of depressing. And so he pops it in and it starts out and it's kind of abstract, obscure, and people start laughing. And I'm like having a heart attack. I'm full on panic attack. And then they stop laughing. And then the 5-minute video plays out. And then the lights come up and it is dead silent. Nobody says anything. And every other project, people were like, oh, I like this. How'd you do that? It was like the lively conversation. Mine ends. And of course, I save it for the last because I don't actually think I'm going to put it up there. But he's like, Gretchen, we haven't seen yours. And I just did it. So it's dead silent. Everybody's staring at me. And I'm looking, all of a sudden, 30 people know about everything I think about being gay. And I'm just like horrified.
But that was a very brave thing to do, especially back then. I mean,
oh, yeah. I still can't believe I did it. But the teacher, he said the most amazing thing. He's like, he gave me a lot of very nice compliments. And he said that he really looked forward to what I would do in the future. And then when the class was over, he had me stay after. And I'm like, oh, it's going to be something about coming out. And I don't know. I just was still in this mind of like, oh, no, I'm opening myself for attack. And he said, that was a really good piece. And I really want to talk to you about what class you should take next. And I'm like, I can't do video for credit. I'm busy with this other major. And he said, let me tell you what, I'll make a deal with you. I'll give you 6 credits. Just make something. You don't ever come to class. whatever gear there is, like reserve it ahead of time. But if you think, because the gear checkout was only open for a couple hours in the morning, couple hours in the afternoon, he was like, I'm going to give you a set of keys to the gear room. And if you get inspired and you need to just go there and nobody's checked out the gear, just let yourself in, take the gear, go shoot it, do whatever. So I'm like, okay, great. And I didn't realize at the time this huge gift that he was giving me. Because I didn't see myself as a filmmaker. I saw myself as a future paralegal. I had a great life at that time. I was making.
He clearly did. Now, we need to name drop here, Gretchen.
Oh, Pete Lutzi. Sorry, Pete Lutzi. And he was so supportive.
Does he know the path you took and that you became a cinematographer?
Yeah, he does. And it was really interesting. Like I did, and the project I ended up doing was a documentary feature film, like the first thing I did for him.
Just aim high, just go all in, Gretchen.
I had no idea. I was like, oh, this thing interests me. I'm going to go start interviewing people. I'm going to start filming this. And I was so excited. And people would work with me. And it was like, I got everybody I knew that was willing to operate a camera. I had to operate on a camera at some point in this feature. But it won awards and it went on small festivals, and but it changed my life. And so within a year from that Madonna video, I had quit the law firm and I had gotten a job like selling ads at the university newspaper and working at the local news station as a studio camera operator. And, whoever would pay me a couple bucks to like run a camera or ask me to do something for them. And I had to go a couple extra years because I had taken no credits in that department. Because I always looked at the communication department as all those crazy people that did group projects, like talk to each other too much. So I was like, all of a sudden I had to be in college a lot longer, but I knew.
You could smell it by then.
Yeah, but I didn't know anything, but I still couldn't afford film school and all this stuff. And I was still kind of self-taught. And like how I studied film, I guess, was the history department had this teacher, Phoebe Lundy, who was amazing, very liberal, activist. Her take on, these movies that you would watch. So I did 2 semesters of Russian film and then propaganda film and women in film. Like that's where I did my film study, was in the history department, but it was all from a history angle, not a technical angle. But yeah, and then rented all the videos I could at the video store. But I'm in Idaho. There's no cinematography magazines at the newsstand. I don't know what to read, and the internet still really isn't there. And so I'm just kind of doing my thing. And yeah, and then I moved to Seattle, Washington, because that's where I'm going to make it big in the film world. And I get there the year after everything goes to Canada. So I'm competing in Seattle with people from Northern Exposure and Twin Peaks that are those had just stopped shooting the year before. So nobody's going to hire me. I have no film degree. I have no real experience outside of working with like public access and making my own projects, and whoever will hire me.
So then you decided to go back to school. Then you went to the Evergreen State College there, and you did liberal arts. So what prompted you to do that then? Because you'd already had a taste for the film business.
Well, what prompted me to do that is I had heard they had a pretty good film program, and it was affordable because I was still paying for my own college. And I felt like Seattle was a film community because of Twin Peaks and Northern Exposure, where I could go and I could work. And I was very intimidated by California and New York. So I never really saw myself living and working in either of those places. So I went to the Evergreen State College, and my experience was like not what I thought it was going to be. It was kind of a hard program to get in. Like they had, I think, 100, 200 people apply. They chose 24. I had to write what my senior project was going to be before they accepted me. So I needed to know what I was going to do for my last project before class even started. And it was interesting. It was kind of hands off. We didn't have tests. We didn't have to read books. It was though I was an intro to video for audit all over again. And we did 4 major projects, and the professor really only commented on 2 of mine. And I don't know, I was really frustrated by the whole experience. And my final project, it was a good one. I worked on film to kind of figure out all that stuff in the beginning because I thought everything, documentaries and whatever, shot on film. And it wasn't until the end when they had professionals come in for Q&A day at the last week of school. And I asked a documentary person, like, what cameras do you shoot on? And he was like, Betacam. And I'm like, what's a Betacam? And I'm like, don't you shoot on 16 millimeter? And he's like, no, we just shoot on video cameras. And I'm like, no, I've done this whole year to figure out film. You're telling me I'm going to shoot on video. This is terrible.
I can identify with that because that's what I was hearing. You were thinking, oh, it's going to be 60 mil. And oh no, just Betacam. Felt like a bit of a come down.
It did. But looking back, it did teach me shooting with intention. Because when you're shooting on film, you don't hit start until everything's good, especially as a student paying for everything. I was very careful, what I actually rolled film on and what I didn't. But my final project was on video because it was an pet overpopulation video. It was about microchipping, which was new and it started near there, and just all these things. And American Humane was interested in distributing it, as was PAWS and PETA, and a lot of other places were interested in taking my final product and distributing it. And somebody decided in the department that student films weren't for distribution. Even though the year before, the film students who actually did film stuff, their stuff was distributed. For some reason, they decided they didn't want me to move forward on this project. And I was so upset because it was I wrote the treatment for this to get into this class. And now you're telling me no. I was so disappointed. So what I did was my final project was and this is probably, no, not my last act of rebellion, but I'm kind of rebellious by nature. I think it's from my grade school experiences. I did a 16 millimeter, 20-minute project on how frustrating it was to go to school there and how I had left with nothing. And there was a day where all the parents came and they watched everybody's final videos and films. And that was one of the films that they watched. And the professor was so angry with me, but I was very angry with her in the department that they would not let me finish this project that I'd wanted to do. I don't even know why I started telling this story.
Your mother, did she come to that showing them? Because I know she followed you, didn't she, when you were a teenager? She moved out of Idaho.
Yeah, she did.
So was she there to support you through this period of your life?
She was not in town, but she was still supportive. I think she was maybe living in Hawaii at that point. She worked in botanical gardens, and she worked at Longwood Garden in Pennsylvania. And I think at that point she was in the Pacific Tropical Botanical Garden on Kauai. And so she was supportive from a distance. I mean, her thing was probably, I'm sure when I told her, she was probably like, they deserved it. The same thing she told everybody when I was a kid. They deserved it. But so when I was younger, I had a lot of anger. And I think I had a lot of issues with rebellion and getting back at people. And I will prove you wrong. I will prove, always having to prove myself. But I think in my 20s, maybe 30s, so it was in my 30s, I started really seeing that I had anger issues and that I needed to redirect that and change that energy into something besides anger. And I was very sarcastic, and then I realized that sarcasm is negativity. So I've kind of spent like my early to mid 30s until now getting rid of all the anger, getting rid of all the sarcasm, getting rid of the negativity. And I think I'm a much easier going, more accepting person now. I don't hold big grudges anymore. I'm not going to get somebody, even if it takes 2 years down the line.
You won't punch anybody now.
No. Like, I went from physical fighting, I gave that up, to verbal and mental fighting. And then I felt like it wasn't a good look and it wasn't serving me well. And telling this story about Evergreen and this rebellious thing I did at the end, I'm like, wow, that's not really a very good look for me, like professionally. But that was then. I was in my 20s, and this is now. And I think we all progress and change through life with experiences. And so I've definitely changed.
There are things that you would put on your portfolio then and your reels, but they wouldn't be on there now.
Exactly. Yeah, that's a good analogy. Yeah.
And so where was the breakthrough then, getting into the industry once you graduated, Gretchen?
Well, once I graduated, I couldn't get a job, so I worked at Kinko's on Capitol Hill in Seattle, which was great. It was where all the grunge artists came through. Comic books were big at the time. All these comic book guys came through. It was like the place. But I was not able to like really get any jobs there. I was applying in news, but they weren't hiring women in news because I had that newsroom experience for Boise, Idaho. But I found that I could get work at, it was Local Origin, which is similar to public access, but they have bigger budgets. So I was doing documentaries with them, not as a director of photography, but as an operator. And we were doing like homeless youth and early children's television. A lot of it was done in Seattle. And so documentary on that. So I was working a lot with different documentary people, working on their documentaries.
Who was the friend that gave you the lead?
The friend that gave me the lead, her name's Wendy Jo Carlton. And later on in life, I ended up DPing her first 2 feature films, which was a great experience and very interesting for me. But yeah, I met Wendy Jo in Olympia, Washington. And that documentary feature film that I had made, I submitted in a film festival, and she was on the programming committee and she programmed it. And that's how I met her. And we've stayed friends. We're friends to this day, but she got me that first job like in the wardrobe department. And then I just kind of spun that as I went along to like working with other people. And she also helped me get the job in the prop department on X-Files.
So when you were growing up though, I know you said you came from poorer background and really very rural, isolated, but were you going to the movies and were you seeing things on the screen? Was anything triggering you then, or really was it later when you, as you just explained, when you got to college?
It was later. Where I grew up, to get to the movie theater, it was a good half-hour, 45-minute drive. And they were kind of selective on the movies they played. There were only 2 places to see movies, one screen a place. And it was a lot of it, like, very rarely were there R-rated movies. And so really the movies I watched were, my mom and I would be at home on weekends and they would have those like, the film festivals at night. So it was like Shirley Temple and Betty Davis, Doris Day, like all those old dames, black and white movies. That's where my love of movies was kind of started, was all of the like big epic Hollywood movies from the, what would that be, 30s, 40s, 50s? Yeah.
Now, I know one of your other passions is Vespa scooters and cars. You're into 2 wheels and 4. Tell us about your hobby and how that came about, collecting Vespa scooters.
Well, in high school, I bought a Honda Aero 80 when they first came out. And I love that scooter so much. And there were I would go to this kind of punk rock club with my friends and dance. And there were all these guys there with Vespas. And I just thought they were so cool. And So eventually I bought a Vespa. But the thing about this Vespa is that it didn't run. It took me 3 years to finally get somebody that could actually rebuild it so that it ran. But when I first moved to Seattle, because I didn't have any money and I was not getting jobs. I wasn't getting any work. So I sold my car and this Vespa was running at that time. So I just scootered around on a Vespa. And if I really needed to get to a set location that required a car, I would borrow a friend's car. I had a friend that rode their bike everywhere and didn't use their car very often. So I would borrow their car to get to set. But I drove scooters only. My first scooter was a 61 Vespa. And then, I have this 63 Grand Sport it's my favorite. And the Grand Sport I used to ship around with me when I actually started getting jobs. Like wherever I worked, I would ship it. And that would be the vehicle that I had on location to get around. And then eventually when I came to Los Angeles, which is a very car town, I made it 2.5 years before I finally broke down and bought a car. And I would, again, if I had locations I really should have a car to get to, I would, rent a car for a month because you can get a really good deal. And there was some place near my house. And the cars, I mean, they look like cars that belonged to people that didn't take good care of their cars. They were all like smelly and beat up, but they were cheap. So I would rent cars, and that's how I got to set. And then one day I'd finally saved up enough money and I got this job for, I think, 2 months that I was going to need a car. And I'm like, I'm just going to go buy a car. And I had set my sight on this little blue Miata. They didn't make a lot of them, so I wasn't sure I'd be able to find it. And I got online and there it was, like right outside of Los Angeles. So I bought that. And then another Miata. And now I have one of the new Fiat Spiders. I have the blue one that they only made 124 of, but I love it. It's absolutely wonderful. And it's funny. It's like Italian Fiat styling on a Mazda Miata. Like they collaborated. So it has all the reliability of the Miatas that I had, but it looks good. So that's what I have now. And it's everywhere I go, like these guys, I was like, every time I stop and I'm parked in it, like guys come up and talk to me about it. It's so funny.
So are you the DP that has car envy or still lens envy, or both?
I don't know. That's a good question. I wish I had more lenses. Lenses are the thing to buy. People, when they ask me if I'm going to buy gear, what camera should I buy? And I'm like, don't buy a camera, buy lenses. Because they're timeless. Like Panavision has lenses that, they used on major movies in the 60s, 70s, and 80s that you can go rent for your movie now. And they just take good care of them. But the cameras that you're going to use at Panavision now are completely different than they used to be. So lenses last forever. Cameras just last until the next fad.
And the car? What's the dream car for you?
Well, I would love a 19 mid-50s Mercedes SL convertible. That's my dream car.
Gretchen, let's fast forward to today then, and what life looks like for you now, because the strike is still on and that's really disrupting the industry for all of you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is.
And they're not even negotiating as we record. So what does life actually look like for Gretchen Warthen at the moment?
Well, I'm pretty fortunate in that 10 years ago, I circled back to narrative. And so I started splitting my time between narrative and unscripted. And then I started doing live performance, like comedy performances, like Dave Chappelle and Kevin Hart, and documentary. I still do as much documentary as I can. And I often say, like, the money I make on some shows they're okay shows, but that aren't like the money that I make the good money I make on some shows. I like to give back by working on documentaries where I may not get paid at all, or maybe I get paid $100 a day, but I'm really doing it because I believe in the project. So I do a lot of doc stuff, and I'm trying to work my way up in the documentary genre. It's just difficult because there are a lot of really talented camera operators and cinematographers there. And I'm not in that world. And usually there's only one or two operators that are the main operators, where when I work in reality, there can be on average at least 10 of us on a show. And there have been a few shows I've done where there were 20 of us or more. So there's bigger crews. So it's kind of easier to get in that genre. So this year with the strike, I've been working with the team that does Cheer, Last Chance U, and this show Wrestlers that just came out. That's really great. And it's a series about the Dallas Cowboy cheerleaders. And I go to Dallas about a week a month to shoot. And it's amazing storytelling. And it's not union. And so I've been doing that, which has been wonderful because I love the way this director, Greg Whiteley, and the DP, Jonathan Nicholas, the way they storytell. It's slow. They let things unfold. They go in with like a game plan, but like people are revealed through the shooting and what they want to talk about or expose about themselves. And so instead of it being a shoot that start to finish is maybe 6 weeks, it's going to be months and months of shooting with the Dallas Cowboy cheerleaders. So I've been doing that, which has been absolutely fascinating. And then I just finished a series about women entrepreneurs. And to get my union hours and to get keep my insurance, I'm working on Dancing with the Stars, which is super fun. I didn't realize how much fun I was going to have. And now I know why people that work there on that show have been there for so long. It's a really fun, creative group of people. So I'm just kind of laying low and doing a lot of day playing and working on documentaries. So because I diversified my background, something's always happening that I'm getting called for. And I've really, in the last 10 years, made a point to only work with people that I respect and that I will be treated with respect and that I appreciate, and I know I'll be happy and I'll learn something and I'll gain something and I'll be challenged in some way. So I feel like even though I haven't been working as much this year as I have in the past, I'm happy. I'm happy with the pace. I'm making enough money to pay my bills. I haven't really added anything to savings this year, which I'm a big kind of prepare for retirement person, but I'm okay. And so I'm very thankful and very happy, and I'm doing good stuff, and I'm still moving forward, and everything is okay. So I feel like I'm doing pretty good.
You won't need to work at Kinko's again anytime soon.
No, but man, if you need something done that involves a photocopy machine, I can help you out.
I'm going to ask you, because it's one of the things that's on the table for discussion when they do coming back to negotiations. What are your thoughts on AI?
Well, AI is kind of interesting. I kind of heard about chatbots last spring, and I was really overwhelmed with a lot of work in the spring. It was before the strike happened, and I'm in the Society of Camera Operators, and we had this big event coming up, and I needed to write literature for it, and I was just struggling describing some stuff, and somebody's like, "Oh, just put it in chat box," and I'm like, "I'm not gonna use AI." And they're like, "No, just put it in there, just see what it says, just like do like a stream of consciousness paragraph, put it in there, tell it to edit it, clean it up a little bit." And I'm like, okay. So I put it in, and what comes out is like, oh, that's exactly what I'm trying to say. And I'm like, oh no. So and then I worked on a project with a DP who the client wanted a storyboard. And so what they did is they used a type of AI that will do things visually for you. And there were 5 actresses that we were shooting. And so she described the scene, what she wanted, how she wanted it lit, who all the actors were going to be. And it created a still that looks almost exactly like what we ended up shooting. And it just created it from her description. And those 2 moments in time for me make me realize the impact that AI is going to have. And I have friends that for fun are like, oh, we did fan fiction and had it write an episode of a show for us that we think is actually better than what was written. And so there's so much corner cutting and cost cutting involved with television. And I think it's because like there's certain people on the board of directors and shareholders that they need money. And I feel like the less money that is spent in the creation, the more money that can be given to people that are involved in the creative process. So those 2 examples for me, and AI is in early days, let me know that we're in for it. You know, AI is definitely going to impact writers, because I was able to have it just edit what I had written for me. So even if people are still writing, you could run it through Chatbox to edit it for you. And editors are actual people that have jobs, and they've spent their whole life being able to take somebody's ideas and craft them into nice, understandable paragraphs. And there are storyboard artists. I mean, so all these people could lose their jobs because of AI. And I don't think it would be used because AI could do a better job. I think it would be used because AI can save money, so that some people can make even more money than they're already making. And then the idea for the actors of not owning their likeness. And this was a conversation that happened on a shoot I did over 10 years ago, where we were in a big green screen room where they were running people through, capturing them for a video game. And the guy was talking about someday we will be able to put actors' faces on all the characters in these video games. And so if you have a young Tom Cruise, he can be young for life. And it will also get to the point where if Tom Cruise is 70, you can run him through a program that will make him 30 again and combine it with old images. So we won't need actors anymore. And fast forward to now, and it's especially for backgrounds, and I'll do plate shots when I work in narrative, where we take 20 to 100 people and sit them in stadium seats, and then shoot out the stadium, and then place these people here and there around the stadium, and then fill in so it looks like a full stadium, but you've really only used 20 to maybe 100 actors that are only making like $100 a day to go do this. And so I can completely see and the deals that people sign, especially when they're just starting out as actors, really are not in their favor, and they sign away a lot of their rights. I can see complete libraries being generated of people's images that are just used in backgrounds of movies, but those people only making $80, and then that's it. And it's, you know, for me, like with copyright, because in the photocopy shop, I needed to know about this. I can't just photocopy photos for people that are copywritten. That belongs to the creator. And I feel like somebody's image should belong to them and shouldn't just be used in perpetuity to save people money. So I think the actors, you know, that whole side of it, their images being used without their permission, I think it's going to get really, really complicated. And also just the cost of living, that whole thing. But then there's also the battle between traditional networks and streamers. And they both have 2 different ways of making revenue and 2 different ways of proving it. In traditional networks, it's through advertising. So it's very clear. You see all the ads, you know how much money, they have a budget. But with streamers, the profit that they're making is more hidden. And also when I work under a union contract for new media, everything is negotiable. Even my rate, there's no longer like a minimum rate. They can go below it. They can make all these changes. And that was initially because it was new media. They didn't know if it was going to make money. It was experimental. They needed help to get going. Well, they don't need help anymore. Now they control so much that they don't need that assistance. And I feel like when I work on a new media show that's going to make millions and millions of dollars, and the per budget cost is $2 or $3 million per episode, I should make as much money as I'm making working on another show that is for a network that's $2 or $3 million an episode. But that doesn't, it's not working that way. New media pays less because they're still covered by these old deals that were made to give them a leg up in the beginning.
Your partner, Natalie Watts, she's also a director and producer, so you're both impacted by all of this. And while the landscape is changing for women, the industry is evolving too.
Yeah, it is. And this year's kind of an interesting, there's a lot of play outside of the strike and AI. It's, all the mergers that have happened, and a lot of places have given up their unscripted departments. And unscripted departments quite often are not union, so they could continue to shoot, but they're not shooting. It's this weird slowdown all over, even areas that are not impacted by the strike, like a lot of reality and documentary shows. Usually there's a huge boom in reality when there's a big strike, and that hasn't happened this year. And that's, I think all the streamers and networks are trying to figure out what their futures are in general, regardless of the strike. So it's got a bigger, wider reaching impact than it has in the past.
Well, finally, Gretchen, this show is all about promoting women in visual arts, and the film industry is certainly one where the landscape has changed for women in film. Do you look at your career and with the hope that you may have actually been influential in part of that changing landscape for women? Because I know how much and how passionate you are about promoting women in the industry.
The landscape has definitely changed. I feel like there are more women, especially in narrative, because when I started, it was like there's just not really many women in narrative, especially getting paid, which is why I went to reality. But I was looking at the ratios the other day, and I'm still not sure, because there are a lot more networks now. There's a lot more content than there ever was when I started. And I'm looking at the ratios, and I'm like, we still don't really make up that big of an amount, but slow and steady. And I do feel like that we are getting somewhere. And one thing I think is kind of interesting with us getting somewhere is there's this notion that's kind of circulating right now that women and minorities are getting all the jobs. And because of Me Too and then the big push for inclusivity, that women especially now have opportunities that they've never had before. And I feel like that's not quite the case. And I still am quite often the only woman operator, even with multiple cameras. And I'll still have men on those jobs tell me, oh, it's so much easier for you now to get work as a woman. And I'm like, I have to point out to them, how many other women are operators here? And they're like, well, there's you. And I'm like, yeah, and I'm not new. Like, I've been around. I've been doing this for 25 years. And it used to be when I came on set as a woman, if people hadn't really worked with a woman operator before, the idea was like, wow, you must be really good for them to have hired you. But now I am no longer kind of given respect because I have somehow managed to make it on set as a woman. Now there's this thing of you're only here because you're a woman. That's the reason you were hired. And now I have to prove my place on the set, where I never had to do that before. Like it was a totally different kind of proof. I had to prove, yeah, I'm going to prove I'm a woman and you think I'm going to be good. And so I have to live up to that. But now it's like, I'm a woman and I have to prove that I wasn't hired just because I was a woman. So now there's even more pressure on me to do a really great job just because of my gender, not because they hired me to be an operator. So there's the stress that I want to do a good job because like I said earlier, I'm trying to work with people that I respect and I want to work for them more because I appreciate the content that they do and how they tell their stories and their ethics and their respect for crew and how people respect them. So I want to do a good job because I want to work for these people. But now there's the added thing of I also have to do a good job to prove to people I wasn't hired just because I was a woman, which I feel like kind of makes it even harder than it used to be. And then the pushback from the guys, and for some reason they feel like I'm going to be sympathetic about them not being able to get work. And I'm like, I still don't think that it's that much harder for you to get work. And if I'm getting offered this job because I am a woman, I'll take it, because I have been told to my face countless times that I'm not going to be hired because I'm a woman, or I don't have a family to support, or, just all the reasons why I haven't been hired because I'm a woman. And it's like, okay, I'll take it, but I can back it up. So it's this weird time right now of like women now having to prove ourselves all over again, but in a different way. It's not just them thinking we can't do it. It's them thinking we can't do it, and we took their job away from them on the way to set this morning. So it's kind of difficult.
I know you've been a great champion for women in the industry. And finally, let's tell everybody how they can find you online, Gretchen, and on social media so they can follow you and see how you're supporting other women.
Okay. Yeah, this is actually, something that I should have mentioned like 6 hours ago when we started talking. My Instagram is an Instagram called Lady Camera Guy. And I started it 5 years ago. And it kind of started out as a self-promotion because I worked with some women cinematographers that you need to have a page, you need to promote yourself, and this, that, and the other. So I started it as that. But I'm a little funny about being in front of the camera, calling a lot of attention to myself. So to make myself feel better, I started posting photos of women I work with. And then on Instagram, I started seeing other women that were operators. I'm like, oh, they're cool. I love that photo. I love what they have to say about whatever. So I started following all these women and started reposting them also. And then it's just kind of turned into, I very seldom do I post about myself. But right now, what Lady Camera Guy is it's an Instagram page that features women operators. And some of them are also DPs that operate. So for me, the important thing is that every woman that is on the page also can pick up a camera and operate with it. And I have students that are just starting out, all the way to like Mandy Walker, who's like my favorite female cinematographer. They're all in there in the same week, because it's kind of to encourage any woman who's thinking about operating or who is already an operator, that there are other women operating, and here they are. And there are hundreds of them, thousands of them all over the world. And it's kind of nice because, sometimes I'll travel to countries where they do not believe that women are capable of being camera operators. So having worked and shot in those countries and having had the locals tell me, I've never met a woman before, you can't operate, like to my face telling me I'm terrible at my job just because I'm a woman without ever seeing anything that I've shot. And they feel like they can tell me this. I don't know. The things that people have said to my face, that could be a whole Instagram page on its own. But I love it because when I see women in these countries, I know that they need to be reposted. And there have been women in small countries that kind of thought maybe they were the only woman with a camera trying to make it. And they'll see somebody else I posted, and then they connect off my page. So the Lady Camera Guy has become kind of bigger than myself. And so I feel like I have an obligation. Try to post twice a day. And I feel like I have an obligation to find new women. And, obligation's the wrong word for it. I love when I come across somebody that I have am not following that I didn't know existed. And I'm like, oh my God, here's somebody else. And there are all these wildlife women that are coming out of nowhere. And I know that's a really tough one because, you know, they're climbing mountains and all this stuff, but they're traveling the world and they're doing all this great stuff. And so for me, it's a way to like really, you know, put the faces of women with cameras out there so that other women can look at it and they can be inspired by it and they can connect with it and they can feel better and they can reach out to these women. I only post from public pages. And for some reason, women are a little apprehensive about making their pages public, which is unfortunate because there's some amazing private pages. And, but I only post from public pages. And one of the reasons I do that is because it's out there, it's in public. And I always repost exactly what they have said, how they want to present themselves. Very rarely will I add to it, but also so that the women that are following them, they can go to that page and they can look through it and they can learn from it. And because some people are a little intimidated about, can I follow you? Just simply asking to follow somebody who's not public. So this way it's really accessible for people, even if they're a bit intimidated. And I have over 60,000 followers. And yeah, I'm very, very proud of it. I think it's a good thing. And it's really, and I'll go places that people will be like, oh, hi, what's your name? And I'll introduce myself. They'll be like, oh, it's very good to meet you. And I'll be like, I'm Lady Camera Guy. And they're like, oh my God, you're Lady Camera Guy. And then they talk to me about how it's inspired them or that I posted them, because I recognize a lot of these women when I'm out and I forget that I don't post myself much, so they don't necessarily know who I am or what I look like. But I'm very well aware of who they are and what they look like. So it's kind of fun. And I'm also on the board of Society of Camera Operators and constantly trying to get women to join SOC. And the nice thing about SOC is it's just focused on operating. It's not about being a director of photography or cinematographer or a director. It's not about being an above the line force. It's about being the best operator that you can be and honing those skills and having pride in being an operator. Because in certain genres, there's not necessarily a pride in operating because everybody's like, but I DP, but I'm a DP. I just happen to be operating. But at Society of Camera Operators, like there's this guy, Jeff Haley, who's on our board, who's one of the nicest guys ever. And he's so great. He's in actors' deal memos that he is their A camera operator, regardless of who the director or the DP is. So it's like so much power and so much pride in the act of operating and how much influence an operator can bring to a set. And then it's not all about the director of photography, and that you should never be ashamed that you're not on a trajectory to be a DP, that you are perfectly content to operate, but you can always be better. So that's a great space. And I've been able to get unscripted people on the board and a lot of unscripted people involved in Society of Camera Operators. And this year, they have decided to have the first ever Lifetime Achievement Award in unscripted. Up until now, it's all been narrative, but this year it's going to be unscripted. And the first woman that will receive this award is a woman named Mandy Whitaker. And we started out on Real World Seattle together 25 years ago. And she's had an amazing career. She's been nominated for Emmys as a camera operator. She's working tirelessly with the union to keep unscripted operators safe because, you know, it's quite often they want us to shoot in cars, shoot for hours at a time, which destroys our bodies and other things. And she's working to make us safer. And she's always pushing unscripted further and elevating the name of unscripted. And in the union, she got on the union board because unscripted operators are kind of under this videotape agreement, which is lower echelon deal with the union, and they don't get paid a lot, but we work very, very hard, and our bodies get torn up, and she's trying to like make improvements there. And so she's really been a big advocate for operators, and she's a beautiful shooter in her own right. So, you know, that the award is going to go to her this first year makes a lot of sense to me because she's a fantastic operator, But in addition to that, she's also elevated our lives as operators along the way. So I'm really proud of that.
Well, Lady Camera Guy, I knew this would be fun. It certainly was. So thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm such a chatterbox. I just looked at the time and it's like, oh, I wrote this list in front of me. I will be focused. I will not wander. I will be to the point. And I've done everything but that. But I mean, I feel like you just bring it out in people. Like I feel very comfortable talking to you. And it's a great honor for me to be part of your podcast. The artist that you had on season 1, I'm still listening, as I drive around, and it's just such fascinating stories. It's absolutely unbelievable. So if anybody hasn't listened to season 1 of this podcast, you need to check it out because it's pretty amazing.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And all the introductions you've made to me for the women in the industry who we will spotlight here on the show. So thanks again for your time, Gretchen. Really enjoyed talking to you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Be sure to follow Gretchen on Instagram at Lady Camera Guy. There'll be a link in the show notes accompanying this episode to her Instagram and also to her website where you'll find her current reel and portfolio. And I hope you'll give us a follow too on social media. You can find us on Instagram at The Art Podcast, that's art with 2 A's, and on Facebook at Hollowell Studios. And if you prefer email, our address is hollowellstudios@gmail.com. I'll be back next week with another guest from the world of visual arts. So I do hope you'll join me then.